Now you do notice this one does say empty, and there's a reason for that. Please type your name, us. Hi, us. Oh, what happened? What's different about this one? It modified the page itself. That's freaky and kind of awesome. All right, let's take a look at what's going on here. Take a look at the HTML first. That gives you some context. I got a form going on? Got a form going on. Label, nothing shocking about that. We've done labels. Input type is text. It's got an ID. That's not shocking. The button is not shocking. So far, nothing is shocking, is it?
How come we have field set in that?
It's because I wrote this a long time ago, and I still use field set in those days.
Okay, so we don't have to.
You don't have to do a field set if you don't do it. No. No, it's just when I wrote this, that's the crazy thing about so many of these things, right? What was once required is now forbidden. It's not forbidden either, it's just I don't use field sets anymore because I love the grid.
So we don't need to know what field set is?
No. If you remember, I did use it in some of yesterday's examples early on,
Yeah.
but it's fine with me if you just leave it out, because it isn't really necessary.
So is there just nothing there in place of it, or is there something new now that's used in place of field set?
It's the form.
Yeah, because we're going to be using this grid layout, remember that grid layout mechanism? One of the things that we do there is when we set the display of the form to grid, we no longer need an internal container. The form is now its own container. Does that make some sense?
And the field set was the box, right?
The field set was the container. It used to be that a form wasn't actually a container you could put stuff in, and that was always confusing to people. And so you had to put a field set in because you weren't supposed to put your labels and so on directly in the form. But now common sense has prevailed and said, of course the form is a container. You don't need a field set anymore. Does that help? Again, that's a detail. So yeah, we can leave that out. It's not hurting anything, and I'm not doing any CSS right now anyway, so it really doesn't matter.
But if I randomly wanted to put a box on my page and put information into the box, I could use field set to create that.
Yeah, but you know what? You could also use div or paragraph.
Yeah, I didn't catch that yesterday.
Right, because, well, you can use anything you want because you can use CSS to make it a box.
I can put a border.
You can put a border on it.
Which
Yeah.
I struggle with as well. So
That's okay.
that
That's
makes
okay.
sense.
Of course you struggled with it. You should have had 6 weeks to do what we did in 6 hours yesterday. And then you should have had a week or two of a break out on the beach with a Corona before you started what we're doing today. And you need 6 weeks to do what we're going to do in 6 hours today. I get that. So it's fine if some things are kind of muddling in your brain because this is not the best way to do this. We're going way too fast. But you've got it. If you practice a little bit, I think you'll be able to catch up. And of course, I've got the videos you can look over later. All right, so we all right with this? No. Because I want to show you the new thing. There's the new thing. Right there on line 27. What's going on there? I've got a div in there, and the div has an ID. Why do you suppose I want to give my div an ID?
Because you put it up at the top of your...
I'm going to refer to it in code. I want it to have an identity. I want it to feel proud of itself. And of course, this is a big philosophical problem. I put the word empty in there, meaning, of course, now it's not empty. But I did that on purpose for this particular example because as I first go, I wanted you to know where the div was. If it was truly, truly empty, would you know that it even existed? No, as a user, right? So just for our purposes, I put the word empty in there so you'll know where to look. Does that make sense?
How could you, like, instead of having it directly, like, you know how it was kind of, like, super tight to the box, is there a way to, like, make it, could you center it and make it huge across the middle?
Answer this.
CSS.
CSS! 3 letters for that. Yeah, we can do CSS for all that. Now, how much CSS are we going to do today? Close to none. Why? Because we got lots of new concepts to work on today. And CSS is great. But here's the good news. When you're a programmer, you often hire somebody else to do your CSS. Programmers are more expensive than CSS. Because it's a lot easier. But I generally don't do a ton of CSS anymore for commercial projects because I'm too expensive. We'll get somebody else to do the CSS because that's not quite as hard as, well, at least the kind of programming you're going to sell is quite a bit harder. But we're not there yet. We're not going to do any of that today yet. So.
Can I ask about the double slash before in greet? So it's function greet and at the top.
Oh yeah, that's a great thing. Thank you for mentioning that. What do you think it is?
Is it just how you ended JavaScript or?
Nope. That's a comment character. Remember we liked comments in HTML?
Okay, yes.
I love comments in JavaScript. I love comments in any programming language. And there's a number of reasons that I like comments. The most important one is that it really helps us know what's going on. And in this case, I'm trying to decide whether I'm going to do my slightly off-color joke. I'm going to go for it. All right, so we've got these slashes, right? These braces. And there's the beginning brace and there's the end brace. And I'm using indentation to help me know what is the end of what. And that turned out to be a really good idea in HTML and CSS, didn't it? It's a much better idea in JavaScript because things get messy real fast. Well, we're going to have functions, and then inside the functions, we'll have other stuff like loops and conditions and if statements and so on. So it's going to be common to go several layers deep, like it was in other things. And since all of these end braces look pretty much the same, I like to put a little comma to say what it is I'm ending. So I'm intending to end the greet function. If I have a loop, I might say end for loop. If I have an if statement, I might say end if. Not required, but why would that help me?
If you're in one of those if then statements, it helps you figure out where things are and where they start and finish.
At some point, you're going to forget one of these things, and your code's not going to work right, and it will give you a completely not helpful error message. Like, end of function not found. Well, what does that mean? Well, probably what that means is you forgot one of these closing braces. Does that make sense? Well, all those end braces look alike to me. That might mean I'm racist. I don't know. That was it. That was my slide. They all look the same, so I'm going to use a comment to help myself identify what it is I think I'm ending. Is that a helpful habit to get into? It's only necessary if you're a beginner. I've been doing this since the birth of this language. I still consider myself a beginner.
So is it fair to say that the double slash tells the JavaScript, ignore everything, ignore the stuff right after this? This is for my benefit, not
This
yours.
is just for the programmer's benefit. Exactly. And we'll use it a lot of other places as well. But for now, I just want you to see this. So far, are we okay? Now there's one new line, two new lines really. Take a look at line 10. What's going on there, you suppose?
So using the
Get the information.
element by ID.
Okay.
It's going to the HTML and finding wherever the word output is.
Yes, it's finding something with the ID of output.
Right.
In the HTML, do I have something with the ID of output?
In that div.
Yes. Yes. So by giving the div an ID, I'm telling it I want to be able to refer to that in JavaScript down the road.
So that's telling it where to put this stuff?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Now take a look at this next line, line 11. What's going on there?
That's the one that's telling it to put something out, right?
Yeah. What's it doing?
Inner HTML
What do you think inner HTML means?
must be on the page.
That's a place. So it's a div, right? Can I write HTML inside a div?
Looks
Did
like
we?
I could, but I was an HTML programmer, couldn't I? Yeah, as a JavaScript programmer. Yup, that's what this line does. I'm so sorry. I keep kicking this over.
It's not doing me much good over there either.
Well, I'll bring it over if you need it. So what it says is take this string, put it together, and this time, rather than alerting it, that was a little rude, we're going to take whatever this text is, and we're going to make that the new HTML of output. So this empty is going to be replaced by hi username. That's crazy. But it might just work. Can we do it?
Can you repeat why you have the dot enter HTML? That kind of what I want to know.
Okay, because output is the name of the object I just made.
Okay.
Okay, and inner HTML is a property. I think we're going to have to do a little object oriented, but let me just say it this way, and then I'll talk about that. Inner HTML is a property, and that refers to what text is inside it, what HTML code is inside that thing. Okay with that? Okay, and then we'll do a little object oriented just so that we can get that out of our system. Let's run it, make sure we understand how it works. Hi, the whole happy group. You seeing it? You seeing what's happening now? Pretty neat. Okay, let's talk object oriented for a moment. Objects are a structure in programming. They really came around in the mid to late 90s that allow us to think about things in programming more like things in the real world. And without getting, I do a whole 15-week class in this, so here's the quick version of it. Tell me about a cow. Does a cow have any properties? Sure. Tell me some properties of a cow.
4 legs.
Okay, the property would actually be number of legs, and the value would be 4
Okay.
in most cases. But yes, number of legs would be a good property of a cow. We're hoping they come with the standard amount, but hey, we're not here to judge. What else? Another property?
A head.
Yeah, but among all cows, these two things pretty much belong to all cows, right? Let's think about things that might belong to all cows but have different values.
Color.
Color, I like that one. So all cows will have a color, but they won't be the same color, yes? Gender. Although cows technically have a female gender, but we're not here to judge. If your cow has identity issues, I'm okay with that.
Horns.
But yes, okay, cattle could have a gender. Property. What other properties might a cow have?
Horns.
Horns, that's a Boolean property. You either got them or you don't. Weight. Good. So, a property is a variable connected to a thing. Would you agree with that? All it is it is a variable that's connected to an object. Does that make sense? And when we have a variable connected to an object, we then call it a property. So inner HTML is a property of a div. Does that make sense? Value is a property of the text field. I could give you a list of these properties and you can look them up, but there's only a handful we need, so far 2, and I just gave them to you. You okay? So when you know you're looking for an object, you can look up its properties, and that tells you things about it. Does that make sense? And some of these things have a lot of properties, and so they can be a little bit confusing. But you can handle it. You can handle it. You can look them up, but most of the time there's more than you really need. So I'm trying to protect you by only showing you the ones that are critical right now. You okay with that? All right. So a cow has properties. We would agree to that, yes? Now, does a cow have things it can do?
Sure.
What sort of things could a cow do?
Move.
It could move. A cow has a move method. What else might it do?
Give milk.
It has a chew method. It has a give milk method. Now that's interesting because the chew method brings something in. Right? The cow could chew grass. The cow could chew hay. The cow could chew something bad. I don't know. But the chew method is interesting because sometimes that brings something in, doesn't it? So some methods bring stuff into the object, like the chew method. The give milk. Wow, you guys, did you like collaborate? I mean, did you email? Because this is beautiful. What about the give milk method? What does that do?
Output.
That produces something. So some methods produce things. Some methods take things in. In fact, you could have a method that did both, right? It could be that the true method eventually returns milk. That's weird. I know.
Well, breathing and that kind of do both.
Sure.
In and out has
Okay.
both into it.
So, if a property is like a variable connected to an object, what do you suppose a method is? Probably a little unfair for me to ask you this. It's a function connected to an object. We haven't really talked about functions in enough detail for that to make sense yet. But a method is a function attached to an object. So, get element by ID is a method of the document object. It's something it knows how to do, just like a cow knows how to move. That was a poem.
So a method,
Mhm.
in a function means it knows how to do something.
Exactly.
Whereas the property is a variable that just describes it, or?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. You got this.
You said document is a method of
Document is an object
document.
that's given to you by JavaScript.
Okay.
And it has a metric ton of properties and methods. Most of which are not important for right now in our life. But that get element by ID, is that pretty important? Yeah. So does that help a little bit? Yeah.
So if we break down the line of text, variable, text name, document.getID, or get element by, the
Mhm.
document is the object, and the get element by ID is the
Method.
method, how you're going to get
Is
the
that
object.
something that
Okay.
this document knows how to do? And when you think about it, that makes a lot of sense. I'm asking the document to get one of its elements for me. I'm asking the cow to give me its milk. It's kind of the same sort of thing. Does that make sense? And this is a great example of one of those that not only takes some input, I'm feeding it the name of something, it returns some output, an actual variable I can use. Does that make sense? We really haven't talked about functions yet, but I guess we have now. You okay? Because you know I'm going to throw another monkey wrench at you.
Okay, one more time.
Sure. Okay.
Property and method, one more time,
Okay.
please.
Help me out, people. Property.
A variable connected to a thing.
A variable connected to the thing. It describes the thing. So we said breed and gender and color. Those would be properties of our cow. Yeah? Which is quite distinct from a method. What would a method be?
A function.
Something it can do. If you prefer thinking in English terms, a property is typically an adjective,
Descriptor,
a descriptor, and a method is usually a verb.
the action.
It's an action. Not exactly true, but does that help you?
Yeah, it's something we can do. It's an action.
Exactly. Now, if we had more time, we'd build our own objects. It's really fun. But I don't think we need to do that today because I want to get you to this Mad Lib before lunch. Coolness? And we'll get there long before lunch. All right, so we feeling okay? No? All right, you probably won't until you do this. That happened yesterday too, didn't it? You're like, Andy, too much information. And then I said, are you ready to start? You said, no, please, dear Lord, no. And then we did it, and you were even more lost until you started to do it and you started to own it. Yes?
So really quickly,
Mhm.
on your function up there that you have function greet, you have variables that are just kind of like objects that come from the HTML, and then you have output, which is where we actually have the code for JavaScript, correct? Like that's that hi plus username plus that thing that's going to go back out.
This is a variable. TXT name is a variable representing
The
this
ID.
text box.
Yeah.
Output is a variable representing this div. Username
again,
is a
that
variable
output is-
representing the value of that text box. And then this code kind of puts it all together. This code gets the value from the text box. This code puts an output in the output div.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we're doing. And here's the really crazy thing. In the very, very old days of programming, somebody here did COBOL, right? In the old days of programming, right, we did what's called batch programming. So every program had the same structure. You'd bring in data, you'd manipulate it, you'd pass data out. That's because you usually didn't have user interaction. Well, here's the interesting thing. In the most modern forms of programming, that's exactly what we're doing again. First step, gather information from, in this case, the screen, process it, output it to the screen. That's what we're doing, okay? I think it's not going to make sense until we integrate it. Let me give you a couple more tips, and not new ideas really, but some more tips on how we integrate this whole thing, and you'll be ready. Are you frightened? Little fear is okay. That means you're embarking in an interesting new place. How bad is it to be lost? Well, look at it this way. If you're lost, at least you're someplace new. If you're never lost, you never went anyplace interesting. And have I been some interesting places? All right, so, yeah. Okay. I'm not going to worry about these two, because you don't need it. Okay, let me show you this one thing, just because I think it's kind of cool. This is really the same sort of deal. Okay, I'm just going to... Hi, that's my Swedish name. Take a look at something interesting that I've done with this code. It's not a horribly critical thing, but it's nice. Didn't really change any of the code at all. I did change a little bit in the header. And what have I done in the header?
Added some CSS.
Yeah, but the CSS isn't here, is it? I outsourced it. Coolness. And what about the JavaScript? I outsourced that too. Now, that's never necessary, but can you see why it might be sometimes a good idea?
I don't know.
So when you say you outsource it, what are you referring to?
What I mean is...
the languages or the line of code's not there. Where is it?
It's not in here. Where is it? Well, let's click on this thing, shall we?
So you hyperlinked it essentially?
Essentially, I have a whole new file that contains nothing but CSS code. Oh! Why could that be cool?
You can create a whole bunch of stuff and make it all format the same.
Okay, I love all these answers. Not the one I'm looking for. Here's the one I'm looking for. How do you solve a hard problem? You make it a bunch of easy problems. Yeah, that is probably the only wisdom I've got. Maybe more. How do you solve a hard problem? You make it a bunch of easier problems. Would you agree? And how many times did I say yesterday, solve one problem at a time? With a gentle solve one problem at a time. Because how often do you get messed up when you're trying to solve more than one thing at a time? All the time. So having our CSS in a totally separate file really helps me think, right now I'm in CSS land. I only think of CSS. Don't you bother me with HTML or JavaScript. I don't want to think about that. I want to think about CSS right now. Is that a great thing? Yeah. Especially because in a professional environment, typically you'll have different people working on this. And the other advantage of this is once I make the CSS file one time, I can import it into 100 different documents, and they'll all look the same. And if I change it in one place, and boom, it automatically propagates through the whole system.
So, okay, yesterday, somebody asked about making stuff bold and things like that with your HTML, and you made the comment, the CSS allows you to make it, this is how you make it that one change. If you do the CSS just on each page, you still have to go through each page, if you do it this way.
Well, you think about it, you know, that HTML, all the dummies book, I have literally, the actual book was over 1,000 pages. And I got close to that many web pages on my site. And they all are using the same font. How many times did I want to put that, here's what font you use? Once would be good. And then when Dummy says, well, we're going to sue you for using the Dummies font, and they actually sent me that letter. And I said, I work for you. And they said, oh, never mind. The thing where they said the cease and desist, I'm like, I'm representing you. That's why I'm using your font. I'm you. But I temporarily took it off. How did I take it off? One place. And then how did I put it back in? One place. Of course, you tell your customer, oh, this will be very difficult, but since you're a special customer, I'll do it for you. You know, that way you get covered. Yeah. Oh yeah, when you start writing actual pages, they never complain about the hard stuff, the data design, and so often people will have passionate arguments about what fonts and colors you should use. And as a developer, I encourage that. You guys go ahead and fight about that, because it's really easy for me to fix, and I'll never tell you that. That gives me time to work on the hard stuff.
Is it fair to think of these as like external subroutines? And you're just putting a link to that subroutine? I'm going back to old school terminology using term subroutine.
Yesterday I would have been okay with that, today I'm not. And here's why. Because JavaScript is exactly that.
Right.
CSS not. This is external styles. The subroutines, when we start writing functions in JavaScript, that's subroutines, exactly the same. So now that we're making the distinction between a true programming language and not, I would say external JavaScript is exactly that. External CSS is as close to that as we can get in a not programming language. You okay with that?
Yeah.
And if you all didn't get that coolness, it's really okay. Yeah.
Why did you use href to reference your CSS and source to reference your JavaScript?
Because it's inconsistent, and I am so with you. Tim Berners-Lee is not answering my emails on that one. Yes. Sometimes it's href, sometimes it's URL, sometimes it's source. Makes me absolutely flippin' crazy. Pick one. You just have to learn it. And here's a good idea. You could steal it from me.
So JavaScript is always source.
Yeah. Is it okay to start by copying and pasting some of my stuff? Heck, I do it. I steal from myself all the time. Shakespeare did it. I figure I can too. But should you still know what you're doing? Yeah, because at some point my server will be down or something. You still need to know how to do it yourself. And better yet, put it on your own server somewhere, because when you're teaching this, let your students think that you're the one that came up with it. I'm cool with that. All right. So I don't care what the CSS actually is here. Can we just be happy that it seems to be working fine? And then the JavaScript is more interesting. But again, we've already done all this, haven't we? So the reason we sometimes like to do external JavaScript and CSS is two main reasons. One is encapsulation. We always like to break out of problems and solve them as smaller problems. That makes the mental process easier. Agreed? And the other is reuse. It could be, this one is very, very specific, but sometimes I'll write functions that could be reused in 100 different pages. I wrote a game engine, that's all it is. It's meant to be imported, and then you can make games without understanding how my engine works. Pretty cool, huh? You have to know how it works, you don't have to know all the details. So, external JavaScript is nice because it can be reused, potentially, and because it separates out your stuff. So now I'm working in 3 different files. That feels a little weird, but I'm solving 3 distinct kinds of problems. So actually, that's a good thing. You agree?
I have a question.
Sure.
So when you created this external JavaScript file, did you do it in the, so you do that in the Python thing, and you have to say with a JS extension? Is that?
You don't absolutely have to, but I'm going to suggest it.
Okay.
I'm going to suggest a .js extension for JavaScript and a .css extension for CSS. And the reason is your editor is smart enough to give you hints. You notice how it changed the colors sometimes when you did? So it's smart enough to give you hints based on the language you said you're in. And so honestly, that's another advantage, is if you embed JavaScript or CSS in your HTML, it might or might not help you with those little color codes. But if you do it as a separate file, it probably will help you. And that's just one more nice little thing to have. Yeah.
If you go back to the code for the actual that page, where it says link rel equals style sheet, can you explain what the link rel is? I get the type and I get the href is a link, but what's that first line?
Okay. You actually saw this yesterday, although you may not have known it. I didn't emphasize it. Remember when I had you go to Google Fonts and download a font? Yeah. Remember that? You didn't really download the font, did you? You know what you downloaded? You downloaded something that looks just like this. Except, it went out to a CSS file that lives on the Google servers.
Okay.
Yeah?